Welcome back to another incredible story. If you're new here, this channel brings you powerful emotional narratives every week. Stories about family, secrets, and the choices that change everything. Subscribe now so you never miss an upload. Trust me, today's story will leave you speechless. Let's begin. Elena Morris stood in the hallway of her childhood home, her hands trembling as she clutched a small cardboard box containing the last of her belongings. The words still echoed in her mind, sharp and unforgiving, spoken just hours earlier by her mother in the living room downstairs. "You have always been a burden to this family." Her father had nodded in agreement, his eyes cold and distant, while her younger brother Damien smirked from the corner of the room. At 28 years old, Elena had returned home after losing her job as a graphic designer, hoping for temporary shelter and perhaps a shred of compassion. Instead, she found herself labeled as the family failure, the one who could never measure up to her brother's corporate success or her parents' impossibly high standards. The autumn rain pelted against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside her chest. She had spent her entire life trying to earn their approval, sacrificing her dreams to study business instead of art, working grueling hours to prove her worth. And yet here she stood, being cast out like unwanted debris. Elena descended the stairs slowly, each step heavy with the weight of rejection. Her mother, Patricia, sat at the kitchen table, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a coffee cup, her expression a mask of indifference. Her father, Robert, stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the grey afternoon light, his jaw set in that familiar line of disappointment. Damien leaned against the refrigerator, scrolling through his phone with practiced disinterest. Nobody looked at her. Nobody said goodbye. As Elena reached for the front door handle, she paused, waiting for someone to stop her, to tell her they didn't mean it, that she was valued and loved. The silence stretched on, suffocating and absolute. She walked out into the rain, and the door clicked shut behind her with terrible finality. Where was she supposed to go now, when the people who were meant to love her unconditionally had just declared her worthless? Elena found herself at a bus stop 3 blocks away, soaked to the bone, her thin jacket offering no protection against the October chill. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and scrolled through her contacts, realizing with crushing clarity how isolated she had become. Most of her friendships had withered over the years, as she poured all her energy into work and trying to please her family. There was one name that stood out, though she hesitated to call it. Vera Chen had been her college roommate, her closest friend, before life pulled them in different directions. They hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, but Vera had always told her the door was open. Elena pressed the call button, her heart pounding. The phone rang 3 times before Vera's warm voice answered. Within an hour, Elena was standing in Vera's small but cozy apartment in the city, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, holding a cup of hot tea. Vera listened without judgment as Elena recounted what had happened, her dark eyes filled with concern and anger on her friend's behalf. "You deserve so much better than that," Vera said firmly. Elena broke down then, all the years of swallowed hurt pouring out in ragged sobs. She confessed how her mother had always compared her unfavorably to Damien, how her father dismissed her artistic aspirations as childish fantasies, how every achievement she earned was met with criticism about what she should have done better. Vera held her as she cried, and for the first time in years, Elena felt truly seen. Over the following weeks, Elena began to rebuild her life from the ground up. She took a temporary job at a coffee shop while searching for design work, and Vera refused to accept rent until Elena got back on her feet. The apartment became a sanctuary, filled with laughter and late-night conversations that reminded Elena what genuine friendship felt like. She started sketching again, something she hadn't done since college, filling notebooks with illustrations that captured her pain and her slow journey toward healing. One evening, as Elena scrolled through job listings on her laptop, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Damien. "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow at Riverside Park, 2 p.m. Elena stared at the message, her stomach twisting with anxiety and something else, a flicker of hope she immediately tried to extinguish. What could he possibly want? Was this an olive branch or another knife to the back? She showed the message to Vera, who frowned thoughtfully. "You don't owe him anything, but if you want closure, maybe it's worth hearing him out. Just promise me you'll protect your heart." Elena agreed to meet him. though she spent the entire night rehearsing what she would say, imagining dozens of scenarios. When she arrived at the park the next afternoon, she found Damien sitting on a bench overlooking the river, his expensive suit looking out of place against the backdrop of fallen leaves and joggers in athletic wear. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment she thought she saw regret in his eyes, but it vanished so quickly she couldn't be sure. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, maintaining careful distance between them. "I've been thinking about what happened," he began, his voice low and controlled. "Mom and Dad were harsh, but you have to understand their perspective. They worked so hard to give us opportunities, and when you kept making poor choices, it reflected badly on all of us." Elena felt the familiar shame rising in her chest, the automatic impulse to apologize and accept blame. But something had shifted in her during these weeks away. She looked at her brother, really looked at him, and saw not the successful golden child she had always envied, but a man trapped in his own cage of expectations, performing for an audience that would never be satisfied. "Poor choices," she repeated quietly. "Like pursuing a career I was passionate about? Like asking for help when I needed it? Like being human?" Damien shifted uncomfortably. "You're being dramatic. I'm actually here to offer you something. There's an opening in my company's marketing department. It's entry-level, but it's stable. I can put in a word for you if you're willing to apologize to Mom and Dad and come back home." The offer hung in the air between them, and Elena realized this was a test, another hoop to jump through, another way to prove she could conform to their vision of who she should be. She thought about the sketches filling her notebooks, the creative projects she had been developing, the small but growing sense of self-worth she had been cultivating. She thought about Vera's unconditional support and the way she had started to remember who she was before years of criticism had eroded her confidence. "Thank you for the offer," Elena said carefully, "but I'm going to decline. I don't need to apologize for being myself, and I don't need to return to a place where my value is conditional." Damien's eyes widened with genuine surprise, as if he had never considered she might refuse. "You're making a mistake," he said, his tone hardening. "You think you can make it on your own, but you'll fail just like you always do, and when you come crawling back, don't expect any of us to help you." There it was, the cruelty she had grown up with, dressed up as tough love, but really just another way to maintain control. Elena stood up, feeling stronger than she had in years. "I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed by betraying myself," she said. "Tell Mom and Dad I wish them well, but I'm done seeking their approval." She walked away from the bench, from her brother's shocked expression, from the invisible chains that had bound her for so long. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. What Elena didn't know was that her brother's visit wasn't entirely of his own volition, and the truth behind his urgency would soon unravel everything she thought she understood about her family. 3 months passed, and Elena's life took on a new rhythm. She landed a freelance design project with a small non-profit that advocated for mental health awareness, work that felt meaningful in a way her previous corporate job never had. The pay was modest, but it allowed her to contribute to rent and gave her portfolio a much-needed boost. She started attending a support group for adults dealing with family estrangement, facilitated by a therapist named Dr. Marcus Williams, a gentleman in his 50s with kind eyes and an uncanny ability to ask the questions that mattered most. In these weekly sessions, Elena learned that her experience wasn't unique, that toxic family dynamics often followed predictable patterns, and that choosing to distance herself from harm wasn't selfish, but necessary for survival. She met others who carried similar wounds, people who had been scapegoated, dismissed, or manipulated by those who should have protected them. The group became another anchor point in her healing journey, a reminder that she wasn't broken or defective, but rather recovering from a dysfunctional system that had never been designed to nurture her authentic self. One evening in late January, as Elena worked on illustrations for the nonprofit's awareness campaign, her phone rang with a number she recognized but hadn't expected to see. It was her Aunt Margaret, her mother's older sister, someone she had always liked but rarely saw due to some long-standing family rift she had never fully understood. Elena answered cautiously, and her aunt's voice came through, urgent and concerned. "Elena, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow?" There was something in her aunt's tone that sent a chill down Elena's spine, a gravity that suggested this wasn't a casual catch-up. She agreed to meet and spent the night wondering what could possibly prompt this sudden contact. The next morning, Elena arrived at a small cafe downtown to find Aunt Margaret already seated, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her face lined with worry. She stood to embrace Elena warmly, and they settled into a corner booth with their drinks. Margaret wasted no time getting to the point. "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago," she began, her hands wrapped tightly around her cup. "Your parents have been lying to you about something significant, and I can't stay silent anymore. It's been eating at me, especially after I heard they threw you out." Elena's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Margaret took a deep breath. "When you were born, your grandmother, my mother, set up a trust fund for you. It was substantial, meant to give you freedom and security when you turned 25. Your parents were supposed to tell you about it and help you access it, but they never did. Instead, they've been using the interest from that trust to supplement their lifestyle for years." The cafe noise seemed to fade away as Elena processed this information. A trust fund for her. Her mind raced back to her 25th birthday, remembered how her parents had taken her to dinner at an expensive restaurant, how they had seemed nervous, how her mother had given her an envelope that contained only a card with a generic message. There had been no mention of any trust. "How much are we talking about?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. The original amount was $200,000. With interest and careful investment over the years, it's grown to nearly $400,000. Your grandmother wanted you to have the freedom to pursue your dreams, to study art if you wanted, to take risks without fear. Your parents were furious when they found out about it because she didn't set up anything equivalent for Damien. They saw it as favoritism, and they convinced themselves they deserved access to it since they were raising you. Elena stared at the documents in front of her. Legal papers bearing her name, account statements showing regular withdrawals marked as administrative fees that her aunt explained were actually funneled to her parents' accounts. The betrayal was so massive, so calculating, that it took her breath away. This wasn't just emotional abuse or harsh words. This was theft, a systematic erasure of her grandmother's love and wishes. "Why are you telling me this now?" Elena managed to ask. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've been a coward and I can't live with it anymore. Your mother threatened to cut me out of the family completely if I told you. And I valued that relationship more than doing what was right. But when I heard they kicked you out, called you a burden when they've been living off money meant for you, I realized my silence made me complicit in their cruelty. You deserve to know the truth, and you deserve access to what's rightfully yours." Elena looked down at the papers again, seeing her grandmother's signature, dated just weeks before she passed away when Elena was 15. She had vague memories of her grandmother, a warm woman who had always encouraged her drawing, who had told her she was special and talented. She had died of a sudden heart attack, and Elena had grieved deeply, but she had never known about this final gift. "What do I need to do?" Elena asked, feeling a strange mixture of rage and vindication rising in her chest. Margaret explained that she had already contacted the law firm that managed the trust, that they were appalled when they learned the family hadn't informed Elena of her inheritance, and that with proper identification and Margaret's testimony about the deception, Elena could file to gain full control of the funds. There would likely be legal action required to recover what had been improperly withdrawn, but the lawyers seemed confident about her case. She also mentioned that the firm specialized in financial elder abuse and fiduciary misconduct, and they were eager to pursue justice. Over the following week, Elena met with the attorneys, provided all necessary documentation, and filed formal complaints with both the trust company and appropriate financial regulatory bodies. The lawyers explained that her parents' actions constituted breach of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal fraud, though prosecuting family members was always complicated. What became immediately clear was that Elena had been systematically robbed of opportunities and independence while being told she was the problem, the burden, the failure. The gaslighting had been so complete, so thorough, that she had internalized every criticism as truth. When Vera learned about the revelation, she was furious on Elena's behalf. "They stole from you and then made you feel guilty for existing," she said, pacing their living room. "That's beyond cruel. That's evil. Do you want to confront them?" Elena considered this carefully. Part of her wanted to march into their house and demand answers, to watch their faces when she revealed what she knew. But another part of her, the part that had been healing and growing stronger, recognized that confrontation would only give them another opportunity to manipulate and wound her. Instead, she decided to let the lawyers handle communication, to maintain her distance and focus on rebuilding her life with the resources that had always been meant for her. The legal process moved slowly, but within 2 months, Elena gained full access to the trust fund. The amount was staggering. On a humid afternoon in June, nearly 8 months after Elena had been thrown out, Damien showed up at the cafe where she worked part-time. She had reduced her hours there as her design business grew, but she kept the job because she liked the people, and it kept her grounded. When she saw him walk through the door, her first instinct was to hide in the back, but something made her stand her ground. He approached the counter, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here," Elena replied. She finished her shift and they walked to a nearby park, maintaining careful distance. Damien seemed to struggle with where to begin, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I didn't know," he finally said, "about the trust fund, about what Mom and Dad were doing. I swear I didn't know until Aunt Margaret went public with it." Elena studied her brother's face, looking for signs of deception. Part of her wanted to believe him, to salvage something from the wreckage of their family. "But you knew how they treated me," she said. "You went along with it, participated in it. You called me a burden." Damien flinched as if she had struck him. "I know. And I've been in therapy for the past 2 months, trying to understand why. The therapist says I was triangulated, used as a weapon in their dysfunction. They praised me to hurt you and criticized you to control you, and I was too caught up in my own ego to see it." He paused, swallowing hard. "I'm not making excuses. What I did was wrong. I'm trying to understand so I can be better." Elena felt a complex tangle of emotions, anger and grief, and cautious hope all mixed together. The fact that he was in therapy, that he was taking accountability, meant something. But it didn't erase the years of cruelty, the smirk on his face when their parents belittled her, the way he had offered her a job as if she should be grateful for scraps from his table. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I want to try to have a relationship with you if you're willing," Damien said. "Not the one we had before, but something real and honest. I've realized that Mom and Dad's house was toxic for both of us, just in different ways. They made me their golden child, but that came with impossible expectations and constant fear of falling from grace. They made you the scapegoat, which was infinitely worse, but we were both trapped in roles we never chose." Elena appreciated the analysis, but she needed more than words. "What are you actually doing to change?" she asked. Damien listed his actions. He had moved out of their parents' house, despite pressure to stay. He had confronted them about the trust fund theft and their treatment of Elena. He had demanded they seek their own counseling, though they refused. And he had started volunteering with a youth mentorship program to help kids from difficult family situations. I'm trying to break the cycle, he said. I don't want to become them. They sat on a bench overlooking a pond, where ducks glided across the water, and Elena felt something shift between them. This wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a door opening slightly, letting in a crack of light. I'm willing to talk occasionally, she said carefully. But I need you to understand that I'm building a new life, one where my worth isn't determined by family approval or performance. If you want to be part of that life, you have to accept me as I am, not who you think I should be. Damien nodded solemnly. I can do that, or I can try. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I hope to earn it eventually. They exchanged contact information with the understanding that Elena would set the pace and boundaries. As Damien stood to leave, he hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. There's something else you should know, he said, pulling out a worn envelope. I found this in Mom's study when I was packing my things. It's from Grandma, addressed to you. Mom had hidden it in a box of old tax documents. Elena took the envelope with trembling hands. It was sealed, her name written in her grandmother's elegant script. She waited until Damien left before opening it, needing privacy for whatever she might find inside. The letter was dated a week before her grandmother's death, and as Elena read the words, tears streamed down her face. My dearest Elena, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope the trust I set up has given you the freedom to follow your heart. You are so talented, so full of light and creativity, and I worry that your parents don't see it. They love you in their way, but they're afraid of anything they can't control or understand. Your artistic soul confuses them, and in their fear, they may try to diminish what makes you special. Please don't let them. The world needs your gifts, your unique way of seeing beauty in unexpected places. Don't waste your life trying to become someone else's version of acceptable. You are enough, exactly as you are. The trust fund is my way of giving you permission to take risks, to pursue dreams, to build a life that reflects your true self. Use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it. Money is just a tool. What matters is the life you create with it. I believe in you, sweet girl. I always have. All my love, Grandma Helen. Elena sat in the park for a long time, clutching the letter, feeling her grandmother's love reaching across the years. This was the voice she needed to hear when she was growing up, the voice that countered all the criticism and conditional approval. Her grandmother had known, had tried to protect her even from beyond the grave, and though her parents had stolen years of that protection, they couldn't steal this moment of connection and validation. That evening, Elena showed the letter to Vera, who read it with tears in her own eyes. She knew exactly who you were, Vera said softly. And she wanted you to know it too. Elena nodded, feeling something settle deep in her chest, a sense of being truly seen and valued that had eluded her for so long. She framed the letter and hung it in her workspace, a daily reminder of where she came from and who she was meant to become. The legal case against her parents dragged on for several more months, eventually settling out of court. They agreed to return the improperly withdrawn funds with interest, though they never admitted wrongdoing publicly. Elena used part of the restitution to establish a scholarship fund in her grandmother's name, specifically for young artists from difficult family backgrounds. She wanted her grandmother's generosity to multiply, to help others who faced similar struggles. As for her parents, they sent one final letter through their attorney stating they were disappointed in her choices and considered the family relationship permanently severed. Reading those words, Elena felt a surprising sense of relief rather than pain. They had given her exactly what she needed, permission to stop fighting for their love, to stop contorting herself into shapes that would never be acceptable enough. She didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing left to say. Instead, she focused on building her design business, which flourished as she poured her authentic creativity into every project. She developed a signature style that combined traditional illustration with digital design, work that told stories and evoked emotion. Clients found her through word of mouth and her growing social media presence, drawn to the honesty and vulnerability in her portfolio. She hired an assistant, then another, eventually moving into a small studio space that doubled as a gallery for her personal artwork. Dr. Williams asked her to speak at a conference about family estrangement and financial abuse, and though she was terrified, she agreed. Standing before an audience of therapists, social impacted them. Dr. Williams presented her with an award from the mental health nonprofit, recognizing her advocacy and generous support. Aunt Margaret gave a tearful speech about her mother's legacy, living on through Elena's courage and creativity. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood before her chosen family with overwhelming gratitude. "A year ago, I believed the worst things ever said about me," she began. "I believed I was a burden, that something fundamental about me was broken and wrong. My family's words nearly destroyed me, and for a long time I let them define my worth." She paused, looking around at the faces that had helped her heal. "But words only have the power we give them. And I've learned that the opinions of people who don't really know me, who never tried to understand me, don't get to determine my value. My grandmother knew who I was, and she left me more than money. She left me permission to be myself, to take up space, to create and dream and exist without apology." Elena's voice grew stronger. "I'm not going to lie and say I'm completely healed, that there aren't still days when I hear those old criticisms in my head. But I'm learning to recognize them as echoes of someone else's fear and dysfunction, not truth. I'm building a life where I'm surrounded by people who see my full humanity, who celebrate my weirdness and creativity, who show up for me even when it's inconvenient. That's the family that matters." The gathering continued late into the evening, and as Elena watched her people mingle and connect, she felt a profound sense of peace. This was what her grandmother had wanted for her, a life of authenticity and joy, free from the constraints of others' narrow expectations. The trust fund had given her financial freedom, but the real gift was the permission to finally become herself. As guests began to leave, Damien approached her one last time. "Thank you for including me," he said. "I know I don't deserve to be here, but I'm grateful you're giving me a chance." Elena looked at her brother, seeing the genuine remorse and effort he had put into changing. "We both deserve better than what we got," she said. "But we get to choose what happens next. That's the power we have now." Driving home with Vera that night, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but something steadier and more sustainable, a deep knowing that she was on the right path. Her phone buzzed with a message from a prospective client, a major non-profit wanting to discuss a campaign about breaking generational cycles of abuse. She smiled and made a note to respond in the morning. The irony wasn't lost on her that the thing her family had tried to destroy, her authentic self, her artistic voice, her willingness to be vulnerable, had become her greatest strength and the foundation of her success. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who starved for approval and twisted herself into impossible shapes, and felt a wave of compassion for that version of herself. "You survived," Elena whispered to her younger self. "You made it through, and look what you built on the other side." When she finally crawled into bed that night, exhausted but fulfilled, she pulled out her grandmother's letter one more time, reading the final lines. "I believe in you, sweet girl. I always have." Those words, so simple and so profound, had carried her through the darkest period of her life. They had reminded her that somewhere in her lineage there was love without conditions, belief without requirements. Her parents might have called her a burden, but her grandmother had called her beloved. The question that had haunted Elena when she stood in that hallway with her cardboard box, wondering where she would go and who she would become, had finally been answered. She had gone into the unknown and found herself. She had become someone she could respect, someone who chose kindness over cruelty, authenticity over performance, healing over revenge. The words her family spoke had destroyed the false self she had been forced to inhabit. But from those ruins, she had built something true and lasting. In the end, their rejection had set her free, though the cost had been steep and the journey painful beyond measure. Elena fell asleep thinking about her next project. a series of illustrations about women who thrived after being told they were too much or not enough. Women who refused to shrink, who claimed their space and their power despite the voices trying to diminish them. She would call it the Burden series, reclaiming the word that had once shattered her, transforming it into a badge of honor for everyone who had ever been made to feel like their existence was an imposition. Because the truth she had learned, written in scars and hard-won wisdom, was that the people who call you a burden are often the ones too small to carry their own weight, projecting their inadequacy onto anyone who dares to ask for what they need. And somewhere, she believed, her grandmother was smiling, watching her granddaughter finally spread wings that had been clipped for far too long, soaring into a future built on truth rather than performance, on self-acceptance rather than conditional approval, on the unshakable knowledge that she had always been enough.